Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People story. I had always hoped that the world would eventually awaken to the self-centered nature of people like Karen, but it seemed like that day would never come. Little did I know that I was about to become entangled in a gripping tale of entitled demands and escalating conflicts that would put my home, my family, and my very freedom at stake. My wife and I had recently settled into our new house after years of saving and anticipation. Expecting our first child added an extra layer of stress as we hurried to prepare the baby's room and ensure that everything was perfect. Our neighborhood was close to several colleges, making it an attractive location for students seeking off-campus housing. As such, some homeowners in the area rented out rooms to earn some additional income. However, with our family growing, we had no intention of accommodating a college kid. At first, everything went smoothly, but one day, a young man who barely looked old enough for college knocked on my door, claiming he wanted to live in my house. "Can I help you?" I asked, genuinely puzzled by his audacity. He replied, "Yeah, I go to college, and I want to live here." Surprised by his misguided assumption, I explained, "I'm sorry, but you must have the wrong house. We haven't posted any rental advertisements." Undeterred, he persisted, "This house is small, so it must be cheap enough for me." Chuckling to myself, I reiterated that we were not renting and closed the door. My wife and I shared a laugh, assuming it was some kind of prank or hazing ritual. We brushed it off, thinking it would be the end of the bizarre encounter. To my dismay, the following day brought another knock on the door during dinner time. This time, accompanying the persistent young man was a woman who embodied the very essence of a Karen. I braced myself for the inevitable annoyance. "Can I help you, ma'am?" I inquired, already aware that this encounter wouldn't be pleasant. With a demanding tone, Karen exclaimed, "Yes, my son came here yesterday and expressed interest in your property. However, you disregarded him without even listening." "I did listen to him," I replied calmly. "If he's looking for a rental, he should check online postings." Unyielding, Karen retorted, "This is unacceptable. My son will be starting college soon and he needs a place to live." Unfazed, I responded, "Most freshmen live in dorms and I can't offer a room for rent. That's not our problem." Indignant, Karen continued her tirade. "Dorms? I won't allow my son to endure such a horrible, cramped lifestyle like those poor kids. He deserves to live in a house, and this is the one he likes." Baffled by her outrageous demands, I reiterated, "We don't have a room for rent. I'm not sure how else I can explain this to you." Displeased with my response, Karen snapped, "A room? You clearly don't understand what we are trying to explain. You will give him the entire house. I wouldn't allow him to live with such a rude stranger. You need to move out." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Her audacity knew no bounds. In a fit of frustration, I slammed the door shut, dismissing her absurd request. However, Karen refused to leave. She persisted, incessantly knocking and shouting through the door. Witnessing my wife becoming increasingly distressed, I knew I had to take action. Concerned for my pregnant wife's well-being, I quickly ushered her into our bedroom, urging her to put on headphones and drown out the commotion. Assuring her that I would handle the situation, I prepared myself for round 2 with Karen. But as I approached the door, a cacophony of police sirens suddenly filled the air, signaling the arrival of law enforcement. To my shock, Karen wore a smug expression, as if she had already won. It turned out that she had called the police, accusing me of trespassing in my own home. Tears welled in her eyes as she spun a tale about her son being the rightful owner of the house, which had supposedly been occupied by these vile squatters, my wife and me. The police wasted no time banging on my door and preparing to arrest me, but I refused to let this injustice stand. Amid Karen's hysterical cries, I managed to interject, informing the officers that I was the rightful owner and had the necessary paperwork to prove it. Karen vehemently argued that my documents were fake, further fueling the tension. Determined to resolve the matter, the police agreed to postpone the arrest until they could review the evidence and confirm the legitimacy of my claims. Meanwhile, the attention turned toward Karen, who now raged, insisting that the officers arrest us so her son could reclaim his supposed property. However, when the police asked the son to produce his own paperwork, he could only offer a blank stare in response. He had no understanding of property deeds or possession rights. It became increasingly apparent that Karen's claims were baseless, Acknowledging that everything seemed in order, with me as the rightful owner of the house, the police shifted their focus onto Karen. They sternly reminded her that calling emergency services under false pretenses and providing misleading information about a criminal activity was against the law. Karen's anger escalated as she was informed of the consequences of her actions. "Defiant until the end," Karen shouted, threatening to sue the officers and demanding their names and badge numbers. But the police remained unperturbed, leading her away in handcuffs and depositing her in the back of their squad car. As they drove off, the chaotic atmosphere finally subsided, and my wife and I were left to revel in the ensuing peace and quiet. Months passed, and we joyfully welcomed our baby boy into the world, unburdened by further troubles. The incident with Karen had only strengthened our resolve to protect our home and family. From that day forward, we vowed to never let anyone infringe upon our happiness or lay claim to what was rightfully ours. Our house was meant to be a sanctuary, a place where our family could thrive and grow. So as I reflect upon the battle with Karen, I realize that the world is full of challenging people like her. But by standing up for ourselves and asserting our rights, we can overcome their attempts to seize what belongs to us. Our home remains secure, and our lives flourish, forever free from the demands of entitled neighbors seeking to invade our sanctuary. The next one is a pro-revenge story. My first husband was not a very nice man. For 6 years, I was belittled and basically treated as a baby factory. He was a fantastic father, but a horrible husband. After he finally got his heirs, I was treated even worse until I finally woke up and decided to leave his ass. This revenge story is not about him. I just had to set the scene. I moved out of the house, taking just my clothes, the car, worth $4K no more, and the computer. I had nothing, and stayed at a friend's place for a couple of weeks before I was able to find a crappy townhouse with roommates. I had no furniture, and my bed was a cat pee-smelling couch I was able to score. I ended up having 4 jobs, with one of them being full-time, and once a week I wouldn't even be able to sleep a night between jobs, meaning I had to stay up for almost 48 hours. Now, fast forward 1 year. My divorce was finalized, and I had fulfilled my year's lease for the townhouse. By this time, due to all my hard work, I had furnished the home, my bedroom, and my kids' room for when they would be with me for visitation. The scumbag landlord, let's call him SBL, was a somewhat nice landlord during my tenancy, and I was a good tenant, never being late with my rent. Although I had roommates, I was the sole name on the lease. SBL would show up often, with some excuse like plumbing tests or whatever, just so he could be creepy and hang around, trying to have conversations with me that had mild sexual undertones, which made me quite uneasy at times. Finally, the lease was fulfilled, and I was now on a month-to-month contract. At that time, I was ready to move out of this crappy townhouse and found a great house in the nearby mountains. I was simply thrilled now that I had my feet on the ground and could afford something a bit better than slum living. My lease stated that I had to give 1 month's notice in order to move out. Unfortunately, I was only able to secure the new house for the next month, which was just 3 weeks away. I sent an email to SBL stating that I intended to move out at the end of this month, in 3 weeks, and that he could try to find another tenant. But I did state that if he didn't find a tenant, I would still fulfill my legal obligation and pay next month's rent. Within 1 week, 2 weeks before I was set to move out, he emailed back and stated that it was very generous of me, but he had already found a new tenant for the beginning of next month, so I would be off the hook. He even tipped his hand by stating that he had already collected a deposit from them. Now, something happened a couple of days later, which was no fault of my own or my roommates. The townhouse came with its own appliances, including a washer and dryer on the main level. My roommate had put a load of laundry in and went to the living room to take a nap. He woke up to find that the washer had malfunctioned with the sensory switch, which never stopped the water fill stage, resulting in an inch of water in the kitchen and living room. He turned off the washer and called me for help. I had just finished work and rushed home to assess the damage. It was bad. There was standing water on top of the living room carpet and a good inch of water in the whole kitchen. I called SBL and informed him of the issue. By the time SBL showed up, I had already removed most of the standing water with the help of my roommate and friends who brought shop vacs. SBL didn't seem too upset, which surprised me. An appliance repairman had come to look at the washer and he confirmed the malfunction, showing how the dial would stick on the fill stage and not click over to the agitation stage. After replacing the dial and lubricating everything, he left. The next week was chaos as I was busy trying to pack, and SBL had insurance assessors and workers come in to evaluate the damage. They ended up removing the carpet and cutting out 2 feet worth of lower drywall from the whole main level. On the day of the move, even though I was supposed to be there for a couple more days, SBL let himself in while movers were moving out my stuff, and he went around taking pictures of everything. I initially thought it was for insurance claims. I felt bad for SBL and told him that I would not ask for any of my deposit back. He responded in front of the loading crew and my roommate, "Thank you, that's very generous of you." We parted ways, and I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks into my new home, SBL showed up on my doorstep with a summons to appear in arbitration because he was suing me. What? On what grounds? He claimed it was all in the paperwork he handed me. An 18-page manila envelope with detailed charges, including photos. Now I knew why he had taken pictures. He was nickel and diming me on everything, from a bent Venetian blind, that was already like that when I moved in, to scuffs on walls and more. He even wanted me to pay his insurance deductible and the following month's rent. He claimed that the tenants he had lined up backed out at the last minute, stating that they didn't think the place would be ready in time with the new drywall and paint, so he still wanted me to pay that month's rent. Really? Duck. This. Crap. I knew I had been more than generous by letting him keep my entire deposit, and now he wanted to sue me for thousands? He was not only claiming the damages caused by the flood, but also improvements he needed to make that should never have been my responsibility in the first place. He even included cracks in the living room wall that resulted from the building settling. How was I responsible for that? He was accusing me of negligence, and I wasn't going to stand for it. I knew it was a slummy townhouse complex, and most of his tenants were on welfare. Maybe he could get away with this with others, but not with me. No way! I had just gotten out of a marriage that made me feel insignificant and destroyed my self-esteem. But now, I had my dignity back and felt strong for the first time in a long time. I wasn't going to let any more crap happen to me without fighting back. I had 10 days before the arbitration meeting. I immediately got to work. First, I obtained a signed deposition from the repairman who had examined the appliance, stating that it was in dire need of maintenance and that the last time he had done any work on it was almost 5 years ago. I thoroughly reviewed my rental contract and local laws, which revealed that SBL was obligated to have all appliances maintained and serviced every year. I also talked to some of the other tenants, and learned that SBL had sued previous tenants after the fact. I tracked them down and obtained sworn statements from them as well. Unfortunately, most of them didn't know what to do and didn't show up for arbitration, resulting in SBL winning by default. I was determined not to let him do that to me. I drew up a rebuttal to each and every claim he made, including photos from the year plus that I had lived there. I printed out all my email correspondence and even convinced my ex-roommate and one of the movers who had heard my interaction with SBL about him praising my generosity to come with me. On the day of the arbitration, dressed in my power suit and with my ex-roommate and worker in tow, I showed up at the meeting. In Canada, arbitration is not held in a courtroom, but rather in a conference room at the courthouse with a judge. We had 1 hour with the judge. Since SBL was the plaintiff, he got to present his case first. He spent over 40 minutes going over everything while I sat quietly, patiently waiting for him to finish. Once he finished, I presented my multiple copies of the rebuttal to the judge, SBL, and anyone else who wanted one. I quickly went over each point. SBL was irate and interrupted me almost every second sentence. I paused every time he spoke and sweetly said, "I was quiet and polite during your time to present your case. I hope you grant me the same respect." SBL's face turned red, especially when I presented the deposition from the maintenance worker. I included the relevant sections of the Tenancy Landlord Act regarding appliance maintenance, and stated that it was the only record of maintenance that had occurred. Unless he could produce more recent records from another company, it had been over 5 years since anything had been looked at. In my defense, I also requested my deposit back and a day's pay from work since I had to take the day off for the meeting. The judge then made his statement, and I will always remember it. He said he was very impressed with my presentation, and that it was evident I had a good handle on things. He could tell that my nature was one of kindness and respect, especially through the photos of how I had furnished and maintained the townhouse, taking pride in my home. Bottom line, not only did I win my case, but SBL also ended up owing me over 80% of my deposit back, including interest. The look on SBL's face was priceless. The judge then informed SBL that they would be reviewing all his previous filings, and if there was enough evidence of harassment, he would be reported to the Board of Landlords and Tenants. I'm not sure what came of that. Now, I walked away from that day feeling on top of the world, completely justified, and he got a taste of his own medicine, but it didn't stop there. Oh no. Knowing that this guy had a history of suing tenants, I printed out the final results, with the judge's signature, and gave a copy to every tenant in that complex. I wanted to warn everyone about his practices and advise them to keep notes, photos, etc., so he couldn't do the same to them, but I didn't stop there either. He still owed me money, and I repeatedly asked for payment, but he never responded. He had a deadline to pay me back my deposit, so on that day I went to his house. I found his residence in public records, as he had to file under a certain address as a landlord, and knocked on the door. He didn't answer, though I knew he was home. I rang the bell a few more times and knocked loudly. He then turned on his house alarm, which initially startled me but quickly turned into amusement when I realized what a coward this bully was. I yelled loudly that I wasn't going anywhere. He shouted, "Get off my property or I will call the police." No problem. I stepped off the property but camped out on the front sidewalk. I had a fold-up chair, a cooler with water and sodas, a few sandwiches, and all my paperwork with me. I was prepared to stay there indefinitely. I started telling anyone who passed by, some were already there from the house alarm incident, about how I was a tenant who had been wrongfully sued and now had a claim against him, and he owed me money. I let anyone interested look at the paperwork as evidence. The police showed up. They first went to talk to SBL, who claimed I was harassing him, slandering him, and refusing to leave his property. I was on public property, the sidewalk, and it isn't slander if it's true, which I could prove with all my court-signed paperwork. I wasn't disturbing the peace. I was simply seated outside his home, talking to neighbors about his actions. He was out there yelling that I needed to leave, but I calmly stated that I would be happy to leave once he paid me the amount he was legally obligated to by that date. I wasn't going to leave without money in my hand, and I was more than willing to stay and tell anyone who would listen why I was camped out there. The police informed me that I wasn't doing anything wrong, that it was public property, I wasn't disturbing the peace, and it wasn't slander if it was true. Finally, after an hour of SBL yelling on his front lawn at the police, and at me, of course, his wife came out with money. She handed it to the police, who then handed it to me and documented the final payment. I smiled sweetly, thanked the police profusely, and went home. I have no idea what happened to SBL or if he is still pulling the same crap on others, but I hope I helped instill some fear in him that he can't just screw with people, because eventually it will come back to bite him. Sometimes nice guys, or girls, finish last, but with patience, they can finish with a win. The next one is an entitled people story. I work at a gas station, and I have two customers who are disgustingly disrespectful when it comes to learning disabilities. One is an entitled old man whom I call Hank. He talks to me as if I am deaf, exaggerating his words. I usually roll my eyes because he genuinely believes I am stupid. The other customer is a woman I call Karen. She acts as if I am required to know every cigarette brand on the wall or memorize their prices, which I refuse to do. She talks down to me as if I am a small child, especially when there is a line of customers. She also uses the R word casually as if it's trendy. So on this particular day, both Karen and Hank were in the store. Luckily, my manager was there too. I was about to take my break when Karen demanded that I serve her and process a split payment of cash and credit for gas. Both my manager and I explained to her that our system doesn't accept split payments. However, she refused to believe it and insisted that we make an exception. I went on my break and was reading when Karen made a snide remark to my manager, saying, "I didn't know she knew how to read." My manager, without skipping a beat, responded, "Why would you think she was illiterate?" Karen just scoffed and loudly stated, "Well, we all know disabled people usually fake it. I bet she doesn't even know the name of the book." Memnoch the Devil by Anne Rice. This copy is from 1995 and it was bought by my mother. I can give you a summary, but it might bore you. I smiled and finished my break. She glared at me. I don't play games. Neither do I replied, returning to stocking cigarettes and other products. Hank eventually approached the register with his usual drink and an attitude of false pity. I would like 4 Marlboro red shorts in a box, did you get that? He spoke slowly and loudly. My manager looked at him and said, You know she's not deaf. Well, she is disabled and I was just trying to make it easier, Hank retorted. Finally, I turned around and looked at Hank. It would be easier if you and Karen would stop acting as if the world is ending just because a person with a learning disability like me can work a real job. I shouldn't have to remind you to allow me to focus on my responsibilities so I can provide you with the customer service you need. Both of them stared at me, and my manager simply smiled and asked, Are you happy now? To sum it up, I have two ignorant individuals who can't seem to comprehend that people with learning disabilities can work jobs, even at a gas station. I am not deaf, nor am I invalid. I genuinely wish these two would stop acting as if their world has shattered just because I am here. The next one is an entitled Parents Story that happened to me yesterday. I'm on vacation at a touristy beach spot. I went out mid-morning to the beach before the crowds and set up my towel, umbrella, chair, cooler, etc. Around 11 a.m., while lying on my towel tanning with headphones in, I get a tap on my shoulder. I open my eyes to a middle-aged woman standing over me and her family and young kids starting to set up multiple umbrellas, chairs, and toys about 10 feet behind me. When I took my headphones out, the woman proceeds to tell me that my bathing suit is inappropriate to be around her children, and so I will need to move. Note: the bathing suit is a cheeky bikini bottom, but not a thong. I tell her I was there first, and they can find somewhere else to set up if it offends her. She proceeds to say there are no other close spots to the water. I tell her I'm not moving and put my headphones back in. About an hour later, I decide to hop in the water for a dip to cool off. While in the water, I look at the shoreline, and the woman has packed up my stuff with her husband and is carrying it away from the area. I hop out of the water and get a lifeguard to call beach security while I watch them walking my stuff up the beach to relocate it. Beach security and I approach them. They try to play dumb and say it's their stuff, so they are asked to open the wallet to show ID. Surprise, it's my ID. The cops are then called, and I choose to press charges for theft. And I got my spot back since the family was escorted, kicked off the beach. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.